Good afternoon. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on all of these occasions on our heritage.org website. Would ask everyone in-house if you'll be so kind to check your cell phones that they've been turned off. As we prepare to begin, it's always a nice courtesy to the speaker. And we will post the program within 24 hours on the Heritage homepage for anyone's future reference. And of course, our internet viewers are always welcome to send questions or comments at any time, simply emailing us at speaker@heritage.org. Hosting our guest today is Christine Kim, Policy Analyst in our Richard and Helen DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society. Her work focuses on public policies related to welfare, the family, and marriage. Prior to joining us in 2006, she held administrative positions at several universities. She also spent a summer in the executive office of Washington, D.C.'s mayor, helping to revitalize the capital city's Youth Advisory Council. She also spent a semester interning with the National Association of Schools of Public Affairs and Administration. As a Leslie Whittington Scholar, Ms. Kim received a master's degree in public policy from Georgetown University with a concentration in education, social and family policy, and she graduated magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa with a bachelor's degree in history from Yale University. Please join me in welcoming my colleague, Christine Kim. Christine?
Well, first of all, welcome everyone to the Heritage Foundation. We're really glad that all of you are able to join us today for what promises to be a fascinating, informative, and timely discussion on how fatherhood transforms men and how fathers uniquely impact the lives of their children. It's a timely discussion because for decades, American families have undergone and are still undergoing tremendous changes. Increasingly, men and women are delaying marriage to finish their education and pursue their careers. More and more young adults are also opting to live together instead of marrying. But as research shows, cohabitation tends to be less stable and is not equivalent to marriage. Indeed, family scholars consider cohabitation an incomplete institution. Consequently, young adults are also waiting longer to have their first child, and for many Americans, marriage is no longer a prerequisite to having children. Today, more than 4 in 10 children born are born to unwed parents, with lasting consequences for families, their communities, and society. Parenting and family life patterns have shifted considerably as well. More mothers are working at least part-time, while parents are also spending more time with their children, and fathers have taken on greater caregiving roles. However, more and more parents are also raising children alone, with less help from families and their communities, as divorce and unwed childbearing have driven up the proportion of single-parent families, an experience now familiar to many in Middle America. Perhaps because we all have parents and have lived through childhood, we instinctively understand how children are shaped by their parents. Of course, scientists and social scientists have for decades studied and debated the impact of nature and nurture and how children develop. Less considered, perhaps, is the perspective of how children transform men and women. Here, intriguing questions abound. Is parenthood merely a social transformation, or does it produce biological and psychological changes as well? Do men and women experience parenthood the same way, or are there gender differences? For example, how does fatherhood change men specifically? How do fathers uniquely contribute to the lives of their children? That is, do children receive different benefits from their mothers versus their fathers? And does marriage matter at all for men in their roles as fathers and for their families? In his new book, Gender and Parenthood, Biological and Social Scientific Perspectives, Professor Bradford Wilcox detailed the latest research on these fascinating aspects of parenthood. And I cannot think of a more knowledgeable and insightful scholar to undertake this task. Brad Wilcox is director of the National Marriage Project and associate professor of sociology at the University of Virginia. His research focuses on marriage, parenthood, and cohabitation, and on the ways that religion, gender, and children influence the quality and stability of American family life. He has published articles on these topics in numerous scholarly journals, including the American Sociological Review, Social Forces, the Journal of Marriage and Family, and the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion. His first book, Soft Patriarch, New Men, How Christianity Shapes Fathers and Husbands, examines the ways in which the religious beliefs and practices of American Protestant men influence their approach to parenting, household labor, and marriage. Professor Wilcox is currently working on two other really fascinating projects. One, a book on soulmates, religion, sex, children, and marriage among African Americans and Latinos, and another on the causes and consequences of low fertility in the West. His research has been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, USA Today, the Boston Globe, the Los Angeles Times, NBC's Today Show, CBS News, and numerous NPR stations. He received his undergraduate degree from the University of Virginia, and his doctorate degree from Princeton University. So please join me in welcoming Professor Brad Wilcox.
Thank you, Christine. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for that gracious introduction as well. Actually, can I view the screen here on the PowerPoint? Does someone help me with that too, so I can kind of follow along as I go through here with the? Yeah, can I? Okay, sorry, I'm just. There we go. Okay, okay, great. So I'm here to talk about a new book that I co-authored with Kathleen Kovner-Klein, and she is on the Faculty of Psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania. I'd like to begin just by thanking her. I think we're on the right slide here. Yes, for her work in helping to put together this book. And our aim, as the title suggests, is to think about how gender and parenthood are experienced and expressed by both women and men. And of course, there's been a lot of attention over the millennia on the experience of motherhood, both for women and also for their kids. But what we do in the book is also think about how fatherhood affects men as well as their children. That's going to be the focus of my comments here this afternoon. So to begin, from Hollywood to the halls of academe, we often hear the message that fathers and marriage do not matter. Kids, we're told, need not enjoy the shelter and security of a fathered home, of a married home, to thrive. For instance, after starring in The Switch, a movie about a woman who was having a child with a sperm donor, Jennifer Aniston announced that, quote, "Women are realizing it more and more, knowing that they don't have to settle with a man just to have that child," unquote. Or in academia, Cornell psychologist Peggy Drexler has written a book directed towards maverick moms, as she calls them, moms who are having kids on their own. And she claims that, quote, "Women possess the innate mom power that in itself is more than sufficient to raise fine sons," unquote. And likewise, psychologists Louise Silverstein and Carl Auerbach have minimized the importance of fathers in marriage in their article, Deconstructing the Essential Father, which appeared to much fanfare in American Psychologist. So this message that fathers and marriage are not important has not been lost on today's young adults, many of whom, of course, are sitting right here in front of me. And as you can see here from this poll from the Pew Research Center, a growing number of young adults, of millennials, believe that marriage is becoming obsolete and that the growing variety of family forms in our country is a good thing. And it's all of a piece with an increasingly laissez-faire or libertarian view of family life that many young adults today find compelling. Now, there's only really one problem with this understanding of family life, this idea that basically any family structure is as good as another, and that is that it's not true. Okay? That's the only small problem with this new view out there. It's not true. And the science suggests, as I'll talk about today, number one, that good fathers are transformed by the experience of fatherhood in ways that are largely beneficial. Number two, that good fathers play a distinct and transformative role in the lives of their kids. And number three, that good fathers are most likely to be found in intact married families. Now, as I make these three big points today, I want to also kind of acknowledge the caveat here. And the caveat, of course, is that we all know that there are men who are not transformed for the good by fatherhood. In fact, there's someone who fits this profile in our media right now, unfortunately. We also know that moms and dads can make similar contributions to their kids' lives. I'm talking a lot today about the work of Ross Park, who is featured in our new book, and who's kind of written really in a sense, the Bible on fatherhood with Harvard University Press. And he makes the point, the quote up here, that it's certainly possible that both moms and dads can kind of give kids the basic ingredients that they need to thrive. And the quote, I think, makes that point more clearly than I would just off the cuff. So we know that's also the case. And we also know that kids who are raised outside of marriage can do okay. I was raised by a single mom. I think I turned out pretty well. So there are, of course, exceptions. But my big message here today is that on average, fatherhood is a transformative experience for men. On average, kids are more likely to benefit when they have the presence of their dad in the home. And that on average, marriage is an institution that connects dads to their kids. So let me begin with those 3 points. First, with the point about how fatherhood is a transformative experience for men. And I think in some ways the most intriguing, but also frankly embryonic research here that we're looking at today is on the biological front. There's a lot of talk today about sort of organic this, natural that. And I think we have to think more seriously about how that mentality of appreciating the natural, organic also applies to the human experience of family life. And today I want to just make the point that fatherhood is physically transformative for men. We know, of course, that women are transformed in a very real and obvious way by motherhood. But what we're learning is that men, and actually male primates more generally, who are involved in caretaking of their offspring, also experience marked physical changes when they become fathers, particularly when they're connected to the mother of their kids and to their kids. And for instance, we see research involving men in the United States, in China, and the Philippines, indicating that testosterone is lower among men who are residential or partnered fathers, okay? Now, for those of you who know the social sciences, the big question here is whether there's a kind of a selection effect. That is, the types of good guys maybe have lower testosterone level, and that's what accounts for the fact that there is an association between having less testosterone and being a father who is living with the mother of his kids. But one study that comes from the Philippines tracked men over time and was able to show that men who were both newly partnered and new fathers had the largest declines in testosterone. Suggests there's probably a causal relationship between being partnered for men in a stable long-term relationship and becoming dads. And the next slide gives you kind of a sense of what Gettler and colleagues found in 2011 with this Filipino study, which you can see in group 2, 3, and 4 on the slides up on the wall here, is that over time, men's testosterone levels fall across the board. Okay, so we become, in a sense, less manly, as we get older. But that experience of transition or of decline when it comes to testosterone is most salient here for group 4. That is for the men who are in a stable partnership with a woman and who have become new fathers. So it seems there's something about being in a partnership and becoming a parent for men that is linked to declines in testosterone. And I think that's important, right? Because testosterone, we know, is linked to aggression and it's linked to heightened libido, okay? So this research suggests, as the psychologist Ann Story has argued, that these hormone changes, quote, may play a role in priming males to provide care for young. I'd say just more generally to kind of settle down would be the point. What's also interesting about this particular piece of research from the Philippines is that the dads who were the most involved in the care of their young, the care of their offspring, had significantly lower testosterone levels than dads who were not caring for their kids. So kind of a feedback effect. So biology is affecting, in a sense, sociology here, but also sociology is affecting biology. But the basic point that I'm making is there's a kind of a connection here between what's happening at the social level, what's happening at the biological level, that when it's working correctly, seems to make men more responsible and more domestic. So I say here, so the science basically is telling us that affiliative pair bonding and paternal care may play an important biological role in domesticating men. And the book also has some discussion about how we see similar patterns among primates in the animal world. So the point I'm making here is that this is still kind of an embryonic topic, and we have to be careful about sort of generalizing what we see in animal research to human beings, because we are obviously, in some important ways, more complex than primates. But it's quite suggestive, I think. And as we continue to sort of research this topic, I think we're going to figure out more ways in which the experience of fatherhood, the experience of marriage, the experience of relationships more generally, has important physiological effects on men, for instance, that also have implications for their social behavior and their role in society more generally. So then, switching to that basic set of topics, we see kind of some parallel findings when we look at the social and psychological consequences of fatherhood for men. And we see that on average, there are some positive effects to becoming fathers, provided that men are living with their kids and are married to the mother of their children. So we see, for instance, that men who are married fathers are more likely to earn more money, about 5% more money than their sort of similar peers or their very selves compared to when they didn't have kids. And this is important because this premium is actually above and beyond the premium that obtains for marriage to men. So men get a boost when they get married when it comes to earnings, and this new research suggests they get an additional boost when they have 2 or more kids. And what's also interesting here is that there's no fatherhood premium for unmarried fathers. Okay, so it's the connection between marriage and fatherhood that is linked to men doing better in the labor force. They also attend bars less and church more in the wake, first, of course, of marriage, but then secondly, of becoming dads, according to work by my late colleague Stephen Knock at the University of Virginia. And then it's also the case, too, based upon some new work that I've done with the Ad Health Survey, that men in their 20s and early 30s are less depressed when they're living with their kids, whereas men who are living apart from their kids for one reason or another, or men who don't have children, are more likely, about 35% more likely, to be depressed compared, once again, to men who are living with their kids. And part of the story here in my analyses is that those men who are living with their kids, of course, are generally speaking married to the mother of their kids, and that's part of the story. That marriage effect, once again, creeps up here. So the point here is that kind of when you bring together marriage, co-residence, and fatherhood, men are in important domains themselves more likely to flourish economically, civically, and clearly here psychologically. So what I would say, and this is sort of building on a point that I made in Slate, is that when it comes to fatherhood, it's all about location, location, location. You know, being close to the mother of your kids, being with your kids, being married, all these things tend to work in ways that transform men for the good. And that's an important, I think, thing to recall as we engage in cultural and public policy debates about family life in America. So it's not just about the kids here. We have to understand and acknowledge that it's also about the men here, and especially as our country, I think, grapples with the increasing challenges men are facing in any number of domains. We have to remember that part of what's happening here is related to the decline of marriage among men, particularly among many working class and poor men. Okay, so I've talked about how fatherhood, particularly in certain contexts, can be transformative for men. And let's think now about how men can play a transformative and distinct role in the lives of their kids. And once again, Ross Park argues in our book that the evidence suggests that there are differing styles when it comes to moms and dads that, quote, may provide unique opportunities to learn different kinds of skills that are important for children's intellectual and social competence, okay? So what Park is suggesting is that, yeah, there are a lot of similarities that both moms and dads bring to the parenting enterprise, but there are also some distinctive kinds of talents they bring to the parenting enterprise. And I'm going to talk about four this afternoon: providing, play, challenging kids, and discipline. Now, first, on the point about providership, many of you will remember there was a big study from Pew called Breadwinner Moms. And that study has a lot of important, interesting things to say about shifts in women's earnings as moms in our country. But it's important to understand that at least in married homes in America today, it's still the case that men are taking the lead on average in providing financially for their kids. And these trends here in stay-at-home parenthood give you some sense of these trends. Obviously, women are much more likely to be stay-at-home parents than are men. And even today, about 3/4 of married families are families where the fathers are the primary breadwinners. What's, I think, also important to recognize and to acknowledge here, and often is lost, this sort of point's lost in our public discussions, is that ordinary husbands and ordinary wives generally prefer that the husband takes the lead when it comes to full-time work. And moms are more likely to prefer to work part-time, actually the most popular option for married moms today, or to be at home. So this sort of providership ethic is one that's actually got some popular support that we often don't hear about in our public conversation about work and family. But, you know, besides money, what is it that men give to their kids? And I think, you know, frankly, in an environment where more and more families are headed by parents where the wife earns more, we have to sort of understand and appreciate that men do bring more than money to the parenting enterprise. One of the things that they bring is the power of play. And if you've gone to a park lately, or to a soccer field lately, or thought about your own experience as a child lately, you can realize that generally speaking, men are more inclined to engage in rough and tumble play. They're more likely to surprise and excite their kids. And these kinds of activities that dads engage in are important for kids. They impart important lessons to children. So from a Saturday morning spent roughhousing with a 4-year-old son to a weekday afternoon spent coaching middle school football, fathers typically spend more of their time engaged in vigorous play than do mothers, and play a uniquely physical role in teaching their sons and daughters how to handle their bodies and their emotions on and off the field. Psychologist John Scenario put it this way in his book, How Fathers Care for the Next Generation. Quote, children who roughhouse with their fathers quickly learn that biting, kicking, and other forms of physical violence are not acceptable, okay? And the bigger point, though, here is that what particularly the work of Ross Park suggests is that the lessons that kids learn from playing physically with their dads are lessons that help them navigate not just the athletic field, but also the social world more successfully. And the kids who engage their dads a lot physically tend to be, for instance, more popular in school compared to kids who don't have that experience with their fathers. Okay? So there are a lot of implications when it comes to play that I think many people don't realize, and oftentimes many parents, including many moms, don't realize that actually having dad roughhouse with the kids on Saturday morning or even maybe on Thursday night, you know, may have some long-term benefits that may not be immediately apparent in the moment. When it comes to challenging kids, dads are also more likely to encourage their children to take risks, to embrace challenges, and to be independent, whereas mothers are more likely to focus on their children's safety and emotional well-being. Quote, fathers play a particularly important role in the development of children's openness to the world, writes psychologist Daniel Paquette. Quote, they also tend to encourage children to take risks, while at the same time ensuring the latter's safety and security, thus permitting children to learn to be braver in unfamiliar situations, as well as to stand up for themselves, unquote. And in his review of scholarly research on fatherhood, Paquette notes that scholars generally find that dads are more likely to have children talk to strangers to overcome obstacles, and even to have their toddlers put out into the deep during swim lessons. The swim lesson study, for instance, which focused on a small sample of parents in France actually teaching their kids to swim, found that, quote, fathers tend to stand behind their children so the children face their social environment, whereas mothers tend to position themselves in front of their children, seeking to establish visual contact with the children, unquote. So clearly some differences in style that have implications for how kids, once again, approach the world around them. Now, when it comes to discipline, there are a couple of, I think, points we need to make here, and some of them are actually kind of subtle. And the first point that's important to acknowledge is that actually moms do the majority of discipline in the average home because they spend more time with their kids, even today. So it's important, once again, to acknowledge that although mothers typically discipline their kids more often than do fathers, dad's disciplinary style is distinctive. In surveying the research on gender and parenthood for our book, psychologist Rob Pelkovitz observes that fathers tend to be firmer with their children compared to moms. And based on their extensive clinical experience, Yale psychiatrist Kyle Pruitt and his wife, psychologist Marcia Klein Pruitt, agree with this characterization. In their book, Partnership Parenting, they write, quote, fathers tend to be more willing than mothers to confront their children and to enforce discipline, leaving their children with the impression that they, in fact, have more authority, unquote. By contrast, mothers are more likely to reason with their kids, to be flexible in disciplinary situations, and to rely on their emotional ties to a child to encourage her to behave. In their view, mothers and fathers working together as co-parents offer a diverse yet balanced approach to discipline. Okay, so the point that the Pruitts would make is that both moms and dads discipline their kids, but they have distinctive ways of doing that typically, on average, and that kids benefit from having these two different approaches to enforcing rules or establishing authority in the home, offered to them as they grow up. Okay, so in terms of outcomes, what's the story here? The story here basically is that kids who grow up with involved and authoritative, or what we call good fathers, seem to turn out better. And we can think, for instance, about boys. Okay, we know that boys who don't have dads or don't have engaged fathers are less likely to be disciplined and monitored. They're more likely to fall prey to what's called compensatory masculinity, where they're getting aggressive with people, or where they are engaged in a kind of predatory sexuality. And boys without engaged fathers, or without fathers to begin with, are consequently more likely to end up delinquent, violent, or spending time in jail or in prison as teens or as young men. And part of the story can be seen in my analysis of the Ad Health data from UNC, which was published in The Atlantic around Father's Day. And what this basically is showing us is that boys who have a poor relationship with their dads, that's the pink column, or who live in a single mother household, that's the green column, up here and up there, are more likely to end up delinquent. Whereas kids who have a good enough relationship, that's the sort of middle category, the blue column, are less delinquent. And boys who report high quality relationships with their fathers are the least likely here to be a delinquent. And these relationships hold up after controls for income, education, race, ethnicity, etc. So this is a robust relationship between both the sort of the presence of dad and the quality relationship with dad, and kids, in this case boys' odds of avoiding delinquency. But dads also matter for daughters, okay? We know that girls who don't have engaged fathers or who don't have fathers to begin with are more likely to seek out attention from boys in ways that put them at risk, sexually and in terms of becoming pregnant. And that's partly because they don't have the sort of the attention and the monitoring of dad in the household. And I think partly also because they don't have necessarily a good marriage modeled before them as girls, and so they're seeking models that may not lead them to to a good marriage down the road. And so we can see here, once again, in my analyses of the Ad Health, which were featured in the Atlantic, that girls who enjoy high-quality relationships with their father in the blue and yellow are much less likely to become pregnant as teens compared to girls who enjoy a low-quality relationship or girls who are living with a single mom. That's, once again, the green column in these slides up here on the wall. Okay, so the point here is that dads, once again, matter for boys and girls, for sons and for daughters, in these important outcomes, one related to kind of delinquency and one related here to being pregnant as a teen. Then for both boys and girls, there's an important connection between having a good relationship with your father and being psychologically healthy, one that's articulated by David Eggovine in our book, where he looks at sort of the distinct contributions that dads make after controlling for mothers' involvement with their kids. And then I sort of articulate this once again in the Atlantic by looking at the association for both boys and girls, for teens, when it comes to depression and family structure and the quality of relationship with dad. And so we can see that teens who enjoy good or strong relationships with their father are much less likely to be depressed compared to teens who are living with a single mother and teens who have a low-quality relationship with their father. I just want to just pause here for a second and make the point that I think conservatives often, will make the argument that it's all about family structure and marriage. And what I think these three graphs show you is it's not just about family structure. It's also about fathers engaging their kids, fathers being involved with their kids, fathers working on the relationship with their kids. It's not just the structure that matters, it's the quality of relationship between dad and daughter, dad and son, that shape these kinds of outcomes that we're looking at today in our afternoon conversation. The final point that I want to make in our time together is that fatherhood is most likely to be transformative both for men and for kids when it takes place in an intact married context. And on the kids front, what we know, of course, is that married dads are more likely to maintain that day-in, day-out relationship with their children when they're married to the mother of their kids. It's just sort of common sense. Whereas when they begin by cohabiting, as the first bullet suggests, they're much more likely to break up with the mom, or in the wake of a divorce or a breakup, it's typically pretty hard for non-residential dads to have that kind of consistent relationship with their kids in ways that would propel them into that good enough category or that great category that we saw articulated in my figures. And the sort of other point here, related point here, is that kids who are living outside of intact married families are less likely to have involved fathers, and of course, as a consequence, are less likely to thrive, as we've seen here today. But I also want to remind us that we've seen at the beginning of my talk that marriage matters for men, that connecting marriage and fatherhood matters for men. We've seen that married dads work harder, they earn more, they drink less, they're more likely to attend religious services compared to unmarried dads or dads who don't live with their kids. And I think this is all in the spirit of a point that was made by George Akerlof in 1998. He's a Nobel Prize-winning economist. He's also the husband of Janet Yellen, who's in the running to be the next chair of the Fed. And Akerlof said, the quote, and he's no conservative. He is a Democrat in good standing, but he said, quote, "Men settle down when they get married. If they fail to get married, they fail to settle down." Okay. Now, of course, once again, there are exceptions to that idea, but what I think the research that I presented today suggests is that on average, yes, that marriage and fatherhood, when they are coupled together, are likely to foster a settling down on the part of young men in the United States. So given the transformative power of marriage and fatherhood for men and for kids, I will just conclude by noting first that we've seen this retreat from marriage and retreat from fatherhood, first among the poor, and now increasingly among working class and lower middle class Americans, what I call middle Americans. And given that fact, a social fact that's driven by shifts in the culture, shifts in our public policies, and shifts in our economy, I think to renew renew fatherhood and to renew marriage in this country, we need to focus on economic, policy, civic, and cultural reforms that will strengthen the foundations of marriage and fatherhood for our day, and will enable more men and more kids to experience the transformative power of fatherhood. Thank you.
Thanks so much. This is, like I said, it's fascinating, it's informative, and it's very timely. We do have some time for questions, so, and we'll have microphones going around the room. But if you have a question, raise your hand, and if you could just state your name, your affiliation, your question, that'd be great. I see the lady in the pink dress. Sorry, there's a microphone. Oh, sorry. Okay, that's it. Okay, go ahead. Go.
Hi, my name is Lex McCusker. Enjoyed your talk very much, and it's heartening to see the empirical evidence brought to bear on some of these issues. Why, in the face of this, much of which I would argue is commonsensical, is there such a retreat from marriage? Why the hostility to marriage in the face of this important information?
Well, I think there are a couple of things to say here. I think in most cultures, in most contexts, there's a strong association between money and marriage, between economics and marriage. That people, in one way or another expect to have a certain, economic foundation upon which to sort of situate their marriage and family life. And in particular for the man to be stably employed, to secure a decent marriage and decent family life. And those economic foundations for men who don't have college degrees have eroded significantly since the 1970s. I think so part of the story here is economic. But part of the story, too, is about shifts in the culture. And I think in particular there's a kind of a capstone model of marriage out there today, or a soulmate model of marriage today, where people sort of expect to be entering into marriage when they've kind of gotten all their ducks in a row, both economically, but also in terms of a high-quality relationship with someone. For many people across time and space, marriage is taking place before you've got all your ducks in a row. And I think the big problem today is that many people are having kids before they've got all their ducks in a row, but they're not getting married, before they have all their ducks in a row. So a lot of folks are putting marriage they're putting the baby carriage before marriage as a consequence. So that soulmate or that capstone model of marriage is not connected to parenthood in a meaningful way. But I think also, too, there are many things that we know that are good for us when it comes to diet and exercise that require sacrifice, that require commitment, that require hard work. And I think marriage is one of those things. Having a good relationship with your kids would be sort of a similar point, or with a friend, And there's a long-term payoff to sacrificing, initially for a boyfriend or girlfriend, and then for a spouse. But there is a sacrifice, and I think that sometimes people can be reluctant to sort of make the sacrifice, to embrace a spirit of compromise, forgiveness, et cetera, that are all, all these things are all important for sustaining and starting marriages as well. So I think that's part of the problem, I think, culturally, too, facing us, is that we don't have, the virtues that make marriage more possible for people in terms of that sacrificial ethic as well. Yes, sir. Or do you want to? Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry. Interrupt. But I do see lady in the back with that hand.
Yep.
Thanks.
Lisa Garcia, thanks so much for your book and for your comments. The two topics I was wondering if you might touch on were, I think there was like an underlying premise that lower testosterone and lower aggression were necessarily good, although it might on the local level lead to increased income. I wonder on a national level, GDP level, having more union members versus innovators or entrepreneurs is necessarily a good thing in the long term for a national strategy. And the second part was entitlements. You talked about the economic prong being more about getting more jobs and job training as opposed to reducing entitlements that sort of supplant fatherhood, I think, as a breadwinner. I don't know. Thanks.
Yeah, so on the first question, I think it's certainly you could interpret the shifts in testosterone, in a variety of ways. I was sort of highlighting the positive dimensions to it, but there could be some downsides too. And we do see for entrepreneurs, for instance, they tend to be more likely among, young adults than compared to middle-aged adults. And that there may be a physiological dimension to that. There's kind of more of an entrepreneurial spirit among younger adults, maybe younger men compared to to middle-aged or older adults. And so that could be a downside to sort of getting married and having kids makes, men perhaps, or some men less dynamic in their approach to life. On the entitlement side of things, I think the work that Nicholas Eberstadt has done on the growth and Social Security disability raises some important questions about how that may be also implicated in the retreat from marriage that we're seeing among working class Americans, since the 1990s. That could be part of the story. So, yeah, that's certainly, I think, an important point to think about and to explore in more detail.
Gentleman up here.
Yes, Milton Grenfell, just representing myself. In answer to this question behind me, it occurred to me that historically, all societies are conservative. Revolutionary societies, as we've been living in the West for the past few hundred years, are rather unusual. In most societies, conservative, the father is the head of the household. Okay, it's a sort of a general pattern. And I think that fathers, in a sense, create stability within the family, within society. As you mentioned, they're more concerned with politics, for instance, passing down a worldview. So I wonder, in some ways, if the erosion of our society and the erosion of the role of the father in the family, the diminution of it goes way back, Flipper McGee and Molly and, Father Knows Best and Archie Bunker. I mean, the fathers were the fools. Right. I think it's been, in a sense, as part of the project of the revolution, of the leftist revolution, to, in a sense, diminish the role of the father, because it does enhance the ongoing social revolution and economic revolution we seem to be stuck in. So I wonder if it's, it's kind of a whole part of the leftist project in a way. That's my proposition.
Yeah, I can't speak to that question. I think what I would say is that directly, but what I would say in our moment is that given the kinds of economic changes that we're facing, particularly for many working class and poor families, where it's often harder for men to find decent, stable work that will enable them to be good providers for their families, we need to also think about articulating a kind of a public ethic that has buy-in from the general public, that enables men to be successful fathers and to gain status from being successful fathers in non-monetary ways. And so, in my social context, you see it with some dads, like they're incredible coaches, and everyone knows that they're great coaches, to both their kids and to the kids in the community. And these maybe dads who aren't, earning as much as their wives, but they get status from the community and from their wives and their kids because they're doing something that's, uniquely in some ways paternal. Not that women can't be coaches, but that, given the points that I made earlier, that if we can think about ways to, institutionalize fatherhood, with regards to certain kinds of roles and behaviors that are not necessarily financial, that could be one way that we can strengthen fatherhood, particularly working class and poor communities where men are having more difficulty, as the primary breadwinners in their families.
David Rahimi, I'm representing the Marriage and Religion Research Institute. I have a question. At the beginning, you mentioned that millennials find it compelling, this new idea that marriage is becoming obsolete and that the abundance of family structures now proliferating in society is kind of a good thing for us. And I was wondering if you could speak more to, do millennials find it more compelling in reason or in emotional appeal? And in terms of emotional appeal, I'm thinking more of in terms of libertarian and even leftist sense of indifference to social structures and social changes at the very root causes, and does the answer to this question entail a different social policy response? Because if it's if we find it compelling in reason, we need a different approach than necessarily if it's a millennials find it compelling in emotional appeal, and how do you resolve that in a social policy environment?
Yeah, I don't think this is really rooted in reason, right? Because this, as I said before, the science here is on the side of sort of the intact married family. But I think that there are powerful stories, there are powerful narratives that are being told in our movies, in our music, and in many other social contexts among friends and even family members that suggest that, modern families, whatever structure they may take, are, all equally valid. And so I think the challenge facing us as we move forward is crafting better stories, better music, better movies that do a better job of actually telling the true story about the importance of, on average, for ordinary people and ordinary kids, of marriage and fatherhood. And in so doing, we can, I think, reach that sort of emotional place, that non-rational place that has, I think, a substantial measure of purchase in the sort of hearts of many young adults today. I think, too, we also think, too, about the way in which, our high regard for tolerance and for respecting the boundaries between public and private can also encompass an appreciation for both the private and public purposes that marriage serves and that fathers serve as well.
Hi, Anna Maria Hoffman, Internet Family Research Council. Thank you for your informative talk. My question pertains more to the cultural renewal side of things. So you mentioned how civic organizations and religious organizations need to better outreach to the less educated, right? So what are some ways that they could do that, and also what are some ways that we at the local level can help to cultivate a culture of marriage again?
That's a great question. One of the things that we found in our 2010 report is that the decline in religious attendance has been highest among working class and poor Americans who don't have college degrees, and in particular among men. And so I think you have to think about, well, what is it that sort of engages, men, including working class and poor men? And I think one answer to that question would be sports. So, for instance, having activities geared to men that revolve around, say, Monday Night Football, and where there is some kind of, message or activity that's plugged in during halftime. So kind of being creative and thinking about, how does our programming attract or not attract particularly working class and poor Americans. And this is an important, I think, task facing not only religious institutions but also secular civic organizations who've seen the biggest, decline in their ranks from working class and poor Americans. So that's one example. But I think just sort of thinking strategically about what are the ways in which we can really draw people in, and thinking more, more creatively on that front.
Thank you. I'm Caleb David. I'm just an intern on the Hill. I was wondering if the research had showed any difference in the effects on children, especially boys, if it's a biological father or a stepfather or even some sort of just substitute, whether it's a grandfather or a child of a gay marriage, whether there's any sort of difference between the effects that we were showing with delinquency or anything with that, whether it's a biological father or some sort of substitute.
Yeah, the research, which is focused really, sort of the gold standard research is focused on heterosexual families, and that research suggests that the kids and boys as well are most likely to thrive in the intact biological married family, and that kids in step families and kids in single-parent families are more likely to experience challenges in things like delinquency, depression, substance use, those kinds of outcomes. So it's being connected in a sense to your own father. On average, that's the best arrangement for kids from a family structure perspective. And there's also a report called Wayward Sons from Third Way that articulates a lot of these points and makes the argument that some of the declines that we've seen among boys' educational performance vis-a-vis girls and among young men's engagement in the labor force vis-a-vis young women can be attributed both to shifts in the economy, but also to the fact that boys may be more likely to suffer from the absence of a father, that maybe, for instance, may be more likely to be delinquent in school, to be held back in school, if they don't have a father compared to their sisters or their female peers.
Thanks for talking. Morgan Bennett, I'm an intern at the Heritage Foundation. And I'm thinking more of the sexual culture of America, specifically pornography, how, most men, the statistics show, use pornography, and many are addicted to it. And so obviously pornography de-incentivizes marriages on a lot of sides. Like for the guy, it de-incentivizes, all the virtues of marriage. It's kind of the antithesis of committing to one woman and seeing her appropriately. And then for women, it makes it really hard for them to actually find men who are of marriageable quality, because most women don't want to marry men looking at pornography every day. And it also incentivizes, risky sexual behavior, which creates kids out of marriage, etc. So does your research ever dovetail with like pornography and our culture and how that affects the marriage culture?
That's a great question. My own research has not addressed that topic. But from my reading, I've seen some work suggesting that it does reduce men's incentive to sort of look towards marriage, to think about marriage, to become marriageable, and that also for couples where the husband is engaged in regular use of pornography, that there is more divorce, more infidelity, and less quality in the marriage. So. On the third point, I just don't know if that's, if you can connect, empirically I don't know, if you can connect use of pornography to more non-marital childbearing. I haven't seen anything empirically on that question. But in terms of the link between the quality and stability of married life and pornography, it looks like that link is a negative one. So it does seem to be part and parcel of some of the challenges that we're facing now when it comes to establishing and maintaining good marriages in the U.S.
I see one more question.
Al Milliken, AM Media. Some time ago, I read that girls without a father, I'm trying to remember, I think it wasn't just in their home, but really not in their lives, that they were physically developing, maturing faster than other girls their age. And I didn't really read that about boys, but what research is there on that?
So we see among girls who live apart from their fathers that they are more likely to experience menarche at an earlier age. We also see that among some primates as well, and rodents as well. So, the hypothesis that some people have drawn here is that girls' sexual maturation is delayed by being in the presence of their father, and that's particularly true for girls who have a high-quality relationship with their dad. That would sort of be consistent with this idea that I was mentioning before, that something about being in the presence of a mate or in the presence of your kids that can have important biological and in turn social consequences for both adults and kids. And once again, the researcher here is Bruce Ellis at the University of Arizona, who's done work on family structure and girls' sexual maturation.
And is there anything on boys in there?
That's a fascinating question, and I haven't seen anything about how boys may be affected, physiologically by being raised in a home without their father. The work that's been done by Bruce Ellis is focusing on girls.
That's all the questions we have. Thank you all for being so engaged and providing these wonderful questions. I think that discussion was really fascinating too. So thank you, and I hope you find this very helpful today. Oh, and then of course Brad will be outside signing his book. So if you're interested in picking up a book, and he'll be out there. So. Thank you.